Have you ever met someone who made you feel everything and nothing at the same time? One day they're close, the next day they disappear. Cold, distant, unreadable. You start thinking, do they even care? But what if I told you the person who seems the most heartless is often the one feeling the most silently? And there's one sign, just one, that exposes everything they're trying to hide. Today, you're going to understand avoidant psychology in a way most people never do. And once you see this sign, you'll never look at them the same again. Most people misunderstand avoidance in the worst possible way. They assume silence means indifference. They assume distance means a lack of care. They assume that if someone truly felt something, they would express it easily, clearly, and consistently. But that assumption breaks down when you're dealing with someone who feels deeply, yet fears those feelings just as much. Avoidants are not empty inside. They are often overwhelmed inside. The problem is not that they don't feel, it's that what they feel can become too intense, too fast, and too unfamiliar for them to handle. When emotions begin to rise, especially in close relationships, something shifts internally for an avoidant person. What feels like connection to you can feel like pressure to them. What feels like love to you can feel like a loss of control to them. They may enjoy your presence, crave your attention, and even think about you constantly. But the moment those feelings start becoming real and undeniable, their instinct is not to move closer, but to step back. Not because they want to lose you, but because they are trying to regain emotional balance within themselves. This fear usually doesn't come from nowhere. It's often built over years of learning that vulnerability is unsafe. Maybe their feelings were ignored in the past. Maybe they were taught to be strong, independent, and self-reliant to the point where needing someone else felt like weakness. So, now, when real emotions show up, they don't know how to sit with them. They don't know how to express them without feeling exposed. And instead of risking that exposure, they shut down. You might notice this in subtle ways. They'll have moments where they open up, where they seem warm, present, even affectionate. In those moments, you get a glimpse of what they truly feel. But then, almost suddenly, they retreat. They become distant, harder to reach, less expressive. It can feel confusing, even painful, because it seems inconsistent. But from their perspective, it's not inconsistency, it's self-protection. They are trying to manage emotions that feel bigger than their capacity to handle. Avoidants often don't even fully understand what they're feeling themselves. They might miss you but convince themselves they don't need you. They might care deeply but struggle to put that care into words. There's a constant internal conflict between what they feel and what they allow themselves to show. And that conflict creates behavior that looks cold on the outside, but is anything but cold on the inside. This is why judging them purely by their actions can be misleading. Their silence is not always emptiness. The distance is not always disinterest. Sometimes it's the only way they know how to cope with emotions they were never taught to process. That doesn't make their behavior easy to deal with. And it doesn't mean you should ignore your own needs, but it does change how you interpret what you're seeing. Understanding this shifts your perspective. Instead of asking, why don't they feel anything? The better question becomes, why do they feel so much that they can't handle it? And that realization changes everything. Because once you see that their struggle is with the intensity of their own emotions, not the absence of them, you begin to understand that what looks like a lack of love is often a fear of losing themselves in it. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that distance automatically means rejection. When someone pulls away, the natural reaction is to take it personally, to believe you did something wrong, or that their feelings have suddenly disappeared. But with an avoidant, distance is often less about you and more about what's happening inside them. It's not always a sign that they don't care in many cases. It's a sign that things are starting to feel too real, too close, and too emotionally intense for them to manage comfortably. Closeness for an avoidant can trigger a sense of vulnerability that feels unfamiliar and even unsafe. The more connected they feel to you, the more they risk being hurt, misunderstood, or emotionally overwhelmed. So instead of leaning into that connection, their instinct is to create space. That space gives them a sense of control again. It allows them to breathe, to think, and to calm the internal tension that builds when emotions get too strong. From the outside, it can look like they're pulling away from you, but from the inside, it feels like they're trying to steady themselves. This is why their behavior can feel so confusing. One moment they're engaged, present, and emotionally available in their own way. The next moment they become distant, slower to respond, or even completely silent. It can feel like a switch has been flipped, but that switch is usually their defense system activating. It's not calculated or manipulative. In most cases, it's automatic. They're responding to an internal alarm that says, "This is too much, too fast, too close." What makes this even more difficult is that avoidants rarely explain what's happening. They don't usually say, "I need space because I'm overwhelmed." Instead, they just create that space without warning. And for the person on the receiving end, that silence can feel like rejection. You're left filling in the gaps, often assuming the worst. But the truth is, their need for distance is not always a reflection of your value or your importance in their life. It's a reflection of their emotional capacity in that moment. The more you chase them when they pull away, the more pressure they feel. And pressure is exactly what they're trying to escape. When someone keeps pushing for answers, reassurance, or closeness while they're in that state, it can intensify their urge to withdraw even further. Not because they don't care, but because they feel like they're losing the space they need to regulate themselves. This creates a cycle where one person moves closer, while the other moves further away, and both end up feeling misunderstood. Understanding this dynamic doesn't mean you ignore your own feelings or accept behavior that hurts you, but it does help you see that their distance is not always a deliberate rejection of you. It's often a protective response to something they don't fully know how to handle. They are trying to manage emotions that feel overwhelming, and space is the only tool they know how to use. When you start to see distance as a form of protection rather than rejection, your perspective shifts. You stop immediately assuming the worst about yourself, and you begin to recognize the pattern for what it is. That awareness gives you clarity, and clarity gives you control over how you respond. Because in situations like this, understanding the why behind someone's behavior doesn't just change how you see them, it changes how you protect your own peace. One of the most confusing and emotionally draining experiences is dealing with someone who comes close, makes you feel seen and valued, and then suddenly disappears without warning. It can feel like emotional whiplash. You start to question everything: what changed, what you did wrong, whether any of it was real. But this pattern of coming close and then pulling away is not random, and it's not always a game. For an avoidant, it's often the result of a deep internal conflict that they don't fully understand themselves. At the core of this behavior is a push and pull dynamic between two powerful forces: the desire for connection and the fear of it. On one side, they genuinely want closeness. They enjoy your presence, feel comfort in your attention, and may even imagine a deeper bond forming. In those moments, they allow themselves to move closer. They open up a little more, communicate more consistently, and seem emotionally available in a way that gives you hope. It feels real because, in those moments, it is real. But as that connection deepens, something else begins to rise inside them: fear. Not necessarily fear of you, but fear of what closeness represents. It can trigger thoughts of losing independence, becoming too dependent, or eventually getting hurt. These thoughts don't always come consciously. Sometimes it just shows up as discomfort, restlessness, or a sudden urge to create distance. And instead of staying and working through that feeling, their instinct is to step back. This is where the disappearance happens. It can be gradual, like slower replies and less effort, or it can be sudden and complete. To you, it feels like a complete shift in energy, like the person you were connecting with just vanished. But internally, they are trying to resolve a tension they don't know how to handle, wanting you, while also feeling the need to protect themselves from the vulnerability that comes with wanting you. What makes this pattern so difficult is that it creates hope and confusion at the same time. Every time they come close again, it feels like things are finally stabilizing. You start to believe that maybe this time will be different, and for a while it might be. They may show up with more effort, more consistency, more warmth. But unless they've addressed the underlying fear, the same cycle tends to repeat. The closeness builds, the fear returns, and the distance follows. It's important to understand that this is not the same as someone intentionally playing with your emotions. In many cases, avoidants are not fully aware of the pattern they're creating. They just know that when things get too intense, they feel the need to pull away. And when they've had enough space, the feelings they tried to suppress start to come back, drawing them toward you again. It's less about control and more about a lack of emotional tools to handle consistency and closeness. For the person on the receiving end, this can be incredibly exhausting. You're constantly adjusting, trying to understand, trying to hold on to the good moments while dealing with the painful ones. And over time, it can make you feel unstable, like you're always waiting for the next shift. That's why recognizing this pattern is so important. Because once you see that it's an internal cycle within them, not something you caused, you can start making more grounded decisions for yourself. Understanding the push and pull doesn't mean accepting it indefinitely. It means seeing it clearly for what it is, a cycle driven by unresolved fear and desire. And when you see it clearly, you stop getting lost in the emotional highs and lows, and you start deciding what kind of consistency you truly deserve. One of the most frustrating parts of dealing with someone who has avoidant tendencies is the silence around what they actually feel. You might be waiting for clear words: I miss you, I care about you, I love you, but those words rarely come easily to them. It's not always because the feelings aren't there. It's because expressing those feelings directly makes them feel exposed in a way they're not used to handling. For them, saying something emotional out loud can feel like giving up control, and that loss of control is deeply uncomfortable. Avoidants tend to process emotions internally rather than externally. Instead of talking through what they feel, they think about it, analyze it, and often downplay it in their own mind. Even when the feeling is strong, there's a kind of internal filter that stops it from being expressed openly. They might want to say something meaningful, but the moment comes, and they hold back. Not because they don't care, but because putting emotions into words makes those emotions feel more real, more binding, and harder to escape if things go wrong. Because of this, their feelings often show up in indirect ways. You might notice small, subtle actions that don't seem like much on the surface, but carry meaning underneath. They might check in on you after a long silence without explaining why. They might remember small details about you that you didn't expect them to notice. They might help you in practical ways instead of offering emotional reassurance. These actions can seem inconsistent or confusing if you're expecting clear verbal expression, but for them, this is often the safest way to show that they care without fully exposing themselves. The challenge is that these indirect expressions are easy to misinterpret or overlook. When you're used to more direct communication, their silence can feel like emptiness. Their lack of words can feel like a lack of feeling. And over time, that gap between what you need to hear and what they're able to say can create frustration and emotional distance on your side. You may start questioning your importance to them, even if their actions suggest that you matter more than they're willing to admit. Another layer to this is that avoidants often struggle with identifying their own emotions clearly. It's not just about expressing feelings. Sometimes they don't fully understand what they're feeling in the moment. They might feel drawn to you but also uneasy at the same time. They might miss you but convince themselves they're fine without you. This internal confusion makes it even harder for them to communicate anything clearly, because they don't want to say something they're not sure they can maintain or fully stand behind. When they do express something emotional, it may come out in a limited or controlled way. They might downplay it, make it sound casual, or quickly shift the conversation afterward. It's their way of testing the waters without diving too deep. Even small statements from them can carry more weight than they appear to, because they're stepping outside their comfort zone just to say that much. Understanding this doesn't mean you should settle for a lack of communication. Clear expression is a valid need in any relationship, but it does help you see that their silence is not always indifference. It's often hesitation, uncertainty, and a fear of being too exposed. When you start recognizing the difference between someone who truly doesn't care and someone who struggles to express care, you gain clarity. That clarity allows you to respond with awareness instead of assumption. Instead of only focusing on what they're not saying, you begin to notice what they are showing in quieter ways. And at the same time, you can decide how much indirect communication you're willing to accept, because understanding someone's limitations doesn't mean ignoring your own needs. There is one pattern that stands out more than anything else, something that quietly reveals what an avoidant struggles to admit even to themselves. It's not in what they say, because words are often limited or carefully controlled. It's not even in how consistent they are, because consistency is exactly what they struggle with. The real sign shows up in something much simpler, yet much harder to ignore over time. They keep coming back. No matter how distant they become, no matter how long the silence stretches, somehow they reappear. It might not always be dramatic. Sometimes it's just a message, a reaction, a small check-in that seems casual on the surface. Other times it's more direct, like they suddenly want to reconnect or pick up where things left off. And each time this happens, it creates confusion. You start wondering why someone who seems so capable of walking away never fully stays away. The reason this matters is because people who truly feel nothing don't feel the need to return. When someone is genuinely indifferent, they detach and move on without looking back. There's no internal pull bringing them back to the same person over and over again. But with an avoidant, that pull exists. They may try to suppress it, distract themselves, or convince themselves that they don't need the connection. But the feeling doesn't fully disappear. It lingers, quietly building until it brings them back again. What you're seeing in this pattern is not clarity, it's conflict. Every time they come back, it's because the part of them that wants connection has resurfaced. The distance didn't erase their feelings, it only delayed them. When they return, it's often because they've had enough space to feel safe again, enough distance to lower their defenses. In that moment, the fear is quieter, and the desire to reconnect becomes stronger than the need to avoid. But this doesn't mean the cycle is resolved. The same fear that made them leave in the first place is still there, just waiting for the next moment of emotional intensity. So when things start to feel close again, the pattern can repeat. They reconnect, they engage, and for a while it feels like progress. Then slowly, or sometimes suddenly, the distance returns. This repetition can make it hard to trust their actions, because their presence never feels fully stable. It's important to see this clearly without romanticizing it. Yes, coming back can be a sign that they feel something real. It shows that the connection matters to them on some level, but it's not the same as readiness. Feeling something and being able to sustain it are two very different things. An avoidant can keep returning without ever fully addressing the fears that cause them to leave. This is where many people get stuck. They interpret the return as proof that everything will eventually work out, that the feelings are strong, enough to overcome the inconsistency. But without growth or self-awareness on their side, the cycle tends to continue. The returns bring hope, but the departures bring the same confusion and disappointment. Understanding this pattern gives you a different kind of clarity. Instead of only focusing on the fact that they come back, you start asking deeper questions. Are they coming back with more consistency, more effort, more openness than before? Or are they repeating the same behavior with no real change? Because the presence of feeling is not the same as the presence of stability. When you recognize that coming back is a sign of emotion but not necessarily a sign of readiness, you begin to see the situation more realistically. You stop measuring their care only by their return, and you start measuring it by their ability to stay, to communicate, and to grow. And that shift in perspective protects you from getting caught in a cycle that feels meaningful, but never fully moves forward. At some point, the focus has to shift away from trying to figure them out and back toward protecting your own emotional well-being. It's easy to get caught up in analyzing every action, every delay, every moment of distance, especially when you know there's something real underneath their behavior. You start thinking that if you just understand them better, respond more carefully, or show up in the right way, things will finally stabilize. But the truth is, no amount of chasing can create security with someone who is not yet able to offer it. Chasing often comes from a place of anxiety and urgency. When they pull away, you feel the need to close the gap, to restore the connection, to get reassurance that everything is still there. You might reach out more, try harder, become more available, or even ignore your own discomfort just to keep things from slipping further away. But to an avoidant, this increased effort can feel like pressure, and pressure is exactly what triggers their instinct to create even more distance. So the more you chase, the more they retreat, and the cycle becomes self-reinforcing. Understanding this dynamic changes how you respond. Instead of reacting immediately to their distance, you begin to pause. You give space not as a strategy to win them over, but as a way to maintain your own balance. You stop trying to force clarity from someone who isn't ready to give it, and you start paying attention to what their actions consistently show you over time. This doesn't mean you become cold or indifferent. It means you become grounded, aware, and less reactive to every shift in their behavior. There's a difference between understanding someone and overextending yourself for them. Understanding allows you to see why they behave the way they do. It gives you context so you don't automatically blame yourself or take everything personally. But overextending happens when you use that understanding to justify staying in a situation that consistently leaves you confused, anxious, or unfulfilled. Just because you can explain their behavior doesn't mean you have to accept it at the cost of your own peace. Your power comes from recognizing what you need and being honest about whether it's being met. If you need consistency, communication, and emotional presence, those are valid needs. They're not too much and they're not unreasonable. An avoidant may struggle to meet those needs, and that's something to acknowledge, but it's not something you can fix for them. Growth has to come from their own awareness and willingness to change, not from your effort to accommodate every gap. When you stop chasing, something important happens. You create space not just for them, but for yourself. Space to think clearly, to observe without being pulled into emotional highs and lows, and to decide what you're truly willing to accept. You begin to see patterns more objectively, instead of being swept up in temporary moments of closeness or distance. And that clarity allows you to make decisions from a place of strength rather than reaction. This doesn't guarantee that they will suddenly change or meet you where you are. In some cases, they might respond positively to the reduced pressure. In others, they may continue their pattern regardless. But the goal is not to control their behavior, it's to regain control of your own. Because real security doesn't come from trying to hold on to someone who is inconsistent. It comes from knowing that you will not abandon yourself in the process. In the end, understanding gives you awareness, but self-respect gives you direction. You can care about someone, recognize their struggles, and still choose not to lose yourself trying to make something work that isn't stable. And that's where your true power lies, not in chasing clarity from someone else, but in creating clarity within yourself.